in association with Brookdale Lunch and Meat.
Ready?
Okay, good morning. I hope you guys are doing well. It's basically Lord of the Flies up in my house, but that's okay. We're working through it. Make sure you've watched the other video before you watch this, because that's going to be Federalist 78, where they set up why they wanted the judiciary branch to look the way it does. Really, the main idea in Federalist 78 is that federal judges should have life terms. That's going to insulate them from public opinion, and then therefore they're going to rule on cases based on the Constitution, not based on what is politically popular. We want an independent judiciary. We want somebody playing referee when it comes to the Constitution. We don't want an elected judiciary, because we don't want the popular passions winning out when it comes to court cases, but rather what the Constitution defends and what the Constitution and what is essentially constitutional. So please make sure you've looked at that video first, and that you've written down those main ideas at the top. So he, just like when we watched with Federal 70 with his video, he has those main ideas at the top. Just write down those main ideas of Federal 78. Once you've done that, that's it for required documents. Like, we're good. Other than we really need to just finish up everything we need to know about the Constitution. So what some of those key amendments are, which we're starting to get nailed down. We'll get into some things Congress can't do, and so forth. Just a little bit of review. Just listen. Remember, Article 1 creates Congress. You also get reapportionment in there as well. And remember, I told you guys, when you have to write about the Constitution, and whether it's an argumentation essay and so forth, they may just simply say use Article 1 as evidence. So understand that Article 1, and know that Article 1 is Congress, and it's reapportionment as well. With Article 2, right, we get the creation of the president, or the executive branch, and then you also get the Electoral College in there as well. Article 3 is going to create the judiciary, all right? And actually, all that Article 3 creates is the Supreme Court. So Section 1 says, Article 3 is really pretty short. Section 1 says, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. First of all, if you're writing this down, don't do that. You have P. Consti. Don't write this stuff down. So, all it creates is the one Supreme Court, and then it says Congress is going to create the lower courts. Remember, that's one of those pretty much 8 powers I want you guys to know in Article 1, Section 8. So, right, Congress has the power to tax and regulate interstate commerce, and then it says in there they create the inferior tribunals. What they're saying is they create the lower federal courts. Next, it says the judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior. This means as long as they don't get impeached, they're going to serve life terms. So federal judges can be impeached. Remember, that's a check that Congress has on the federal courts. All right, then it gets into compensation. We're not really worried about that. The key thing to take from this, though, is Article 3 creates the Supreme Court. It says Congress creates the lower courts. Article 1, Section 8 says that as well. And then it also says that federal judges are going to serve life terms on good behavior. And what that means is they're going to serve life terms. So they're never worried about being elected. Therefore, they don't have to worry about if what they're doing is popular with the people. Okay, here's what I do want you to write down. Important parts of Article 1, Section 3. So it creates the Supreme Court, not the appellate or district federal courts. Congress creates those. Congress establishes the lower courts, so the district and appellate courts. And we're going to get into what those are and what they do in a minute. All federal judges serve life terms, all right? So I'm going to move through this slide kind of quick because I talked about it in the last one, so you may want to pause this and write that down. Okay, Article 3, Section 2. Here's the key stuff to get from Section 2. I'm not going to read it to you. This is the longest section in Article 3. But here's what it sets up. It sets up the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction. So cases that have to start with the Supreme Court. All right, let's talk about what the difference between original jurisdiction and appellate jurisdiction is. Original jurisdiction means those types of cases have to start at that court. So for the Supreme Court, their original jurisdiction, so that case is going to start there, are cases where ambassadors are affected, public ministers are affected, and those in which a state is involved. Those have to start at the Supreme Court. Any other court cases are going to start, that are federal, are going to start in the lower courts. The Supreme Court hears most of its cases on appeals. So 97% or something like that of their cases have been heard in lower courts first. They decide that there's some kind of constitutional question there in which they need to weigh in and be the final arbiter, and then they will hear that case on appeal, and then once they do, that is law of the land. All right, I'm going to give you an example in a second here when I show you a graphic. Article 3, Section 3, this is the only crime that the Constitution actually mentions. It's treason. It defines treason as levying war or giving aid or comfort to the enemy. Treason is the only crime mentioned in the Constitution. Okay, so, and I realize this is kind of blurry. If you may want to summarize this in your notes. All right, so here's our three-tier court system. All right, so Congress creates the district courts and creates the courts of appeal, and then you have the Supreme Court at the top. All right. The district courts are the lowest level in the federal system. So there's 94 judicial districts in the 50 states and territories. They have no appellate jurisdiction. Almost all federal cases are going to start here. They have original jurisdiction over most cases. Most cases have to start here, unless it's that public ministers are affected or ambassadors or the states are a particular party, then the case is going to start here. If it was ambassadors or if it was public ministers or if it does involve states, then it's got to start at the Supreme Court. So going back and looking at one of our cases, if you take United States versus Lopez, that started in a federal district court. The federal district courts don't interpret law. They don't shape law. They just hear cases where you've broken a federal law. So in this instance, Lopez had broken that particular law that Congress had passed, the Gun-Free School Zones Act. He lands in a federal district court because the federal government is basically trying that case. He loses that case. All right. Now, he has the right to appeal his case. He has the right to say, hey, here's why the lower court got it wrong, or here's why that law is not unconstitutional. Now that's going to go up to a federal appeal court. The federal appeal court hears the case. I'm pretty sure he lost that appeal case as well. He appeals now to the Supreme Court and says to the Supreme Court, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that Gun-Free School Zones Act is an overreach by Congress. That can't be the district court that decides that. The district court's not going to be the one that shapes or interprets federal law. The Supreme Court's going to say, hey, you know what? We need to look at this case, not necessarily whether or not what he did was violated the Gun-Free School Zones Act. We need to decide whether this Gun-Free School Zones Act is unconstitutional altogether. Okay, so that's how the Supreme Court will shape federal law, rule laws unconstitutional through that judicial review. Okay, so here's our three-tiered court, federal court system. All right, again, most cases are going to be heard at the lower level. They then get appealed up, and then the Supreme Court is the one that actually shapes and interprets federal law, as do the courts of appeal, because they have that appellate jurisdiction. Appellate jurisdiction means they have the right to hear these lower court cases. Okay, guys, that's it for today. I'm going to have a little bit more vocab tomorrow. So you'll probably be writing it down a little bit more. Again, don't forget you've got the quiz Friday. There is no FRQ on the quiz Friday. And that's it.